There have been a few notable instances in the 20th century where kids have been used to help undermine existing social structures and ideologies. By indoctrinating the younger generation, the competing ideologues have been able to inculcate their own ideologies within an army of innocents, effectively tearing apart families, culture, and society with incalculable costs across generations. Germany, World War II, 1939 to 1945, the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls were modeled after the Nazi paramilitary and introduced children to Nazi ideology and policy. The Nazis came to power in 1933. By 1940, the Hitler Youth membership had risen to 7.2 million, 82% of the youth population. Nazi-fying German society was aimed at dismantling existing social structures and traditions to impose conformity. The group indoctrinated children at their most impressionable and removed them from the influence of their parents. Members of the Hitler Youth even denounced their parents when they behaved in ways not approved of by the Reich. Members of the Hitler Youth were encouraged to report what was happening in their schools, churches, and families to their leaders. Nazi Party viewed young people as future party members, mothers, and soldiers. They hoped to teach children to be both racially conscious and physically fit in order to build a new future for Germany. The result was, Germany lost 1/4 of its territory, 20% of the German population became refugees, 60 million died, cost of $4 trillion. China, Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1976, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution and claimed that bourgeois elements had infiltrated the government and society with the aim of restoring capitalism. Mao called on young people to bombard the headquarters, and proclaimed that, to rebel is justified. Many young people responded by forming the Red Guards. Red Guards sought to destroy the four olds: old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits, destroying historical artifacts, cultural and religious sites. Libraries of historical and foreign texts were destroyed, books were burned. Temples, churches, mosques, monasteries, and cemeteries were closed and sometimes converted to other uses or looted and destroyed. Children were called upon to educate their parents whose minds had been corrupted by feudalism, and children were encouraged to disown parents if they found their parents were disloyal to the state. Struggle sessions conducted by Red Guards were violent public spectacles where people accused of being class enemies were publicly humiliated, accused, beaten, and tortured. Struggle sessions were usually conducted at the workplace, classrooms, and auditoriums where students were pitted against their teachers, friends and spouses were pressured to betray one another, and children were manipulated into exposing their parents. The result was, up to 10 million died, tens of millions were persecuted, 200 million starved, cultural sites and icons destroyed. Russia, Civil War, 1917 to 1923, and Self-Criticism, 1921 to 1924. After the Russian Civil War, the Lenin government introduced a semi-capitalist economic policy to stabilize Russia's floundering economy. This introduced a new social policy of moderation and discipline, especially regarding Soviet youth. Lenin himself stressed the importance of political education of young Soviet citizens in building a new society. The All-Union Leninist Young Communist League, Komsomol, was a political youth organization established in 1918. By 1925, membership was nominally voluntary. However, those who failed to join had no access to officially sponsored holidays and found it very difficult to pursue higher education. The Komsomol played an important role as a mechanism for teaching the values to the younger generation, and it served as a mobile pool of labor and political activism. By the 1970s, Komsomol membership had reached 40 million. The concept of politically enforced criticism and self-criticism originated during the 1921 to 1924 purges of academia within the Soviet Union. This would eventually develop into campaigns in which intellectuals suspected of possessing counter-revolutionary tendencies were publicly interrogated as part of a policy of proletariatization. Children were sometimes encouraged or coerced by authorities to report on their parents or relatives if they were suspected of being disloyal to the state or engaging in activities deemed counter to the communist regime. The result was, the Russian Civil War killed 10 million people. Komsomol generated low level of trust, youth relatively politically unaware or uninterested, women unprepared for the realities of the workforce, and the act of empowerment worsened their self-perceptions. Centralized planning was inefficient and stunted the economy. Today. Modern culture war or woke ideology indoctrination. The current culture war began at college campuses in the 1960s with those graduates spreading Marxist-Leninist vocabulary of political correctness in relation to race, gender, culture, or sexual orientation to all institutions. This all settled down in the late 20th century as Western society evolved into a relatively stable meritocratic system. However, since the popularization of social media in 2004, woke ideology has appeared as a warped, juiced-up version 2.0 of political correctness. Woke ideology appears to be on the warpath to sever all ties to family, institutions, religion, and society, in order to burn it all down. The goal is to reduce society to individuals that will find meaning in the only ideology that remains standing, woke ideology. The most obvious targets are kids, which can be influenced 24 hours a day via their digital screens. A wide variety of social movements have been co-opted to also exploit the victim class. These social groups include LGBTQ, victim, trans, feminism, victim, female, immigration, victim, migrant, social class, victim, poor, Black Lives Matter, victim, black, climate change, victim, all, etc. Western democratic societies appear to be the most vulnerable, due to the prevalence of screens, social media influence, and a divisive media. The woke agendas are ever present, however the silent majority are becoming aware of the extreme liberal policies set on destroying the very fabric of society. Many of the childless activists are content in damaging kids in pursuit of their chaotic goals. Kids are being damaged in the following ways.
You have done nothing but dig your heels in and try and make me feel bad about your...
No, I haven't! I've been trying to educate you!
No, your education is brainwashing.
A former KGB agent named Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov claimed in 1984 that Russia has a long-term goal of ideologically subverting the U.S. The plan is to undermine the psyche of the American public through psychological warfare, or ideological subversion, and demoralization. Ideological subversion was defined by Bezmenov as, to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interest of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country.
To change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in four basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black. You still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. In other words, these people, the process of demoralization is complete and irreversible. To get rid society of these people, you need another 20 or 15 years to educate a new generation of patriotically minded and common sense people who would be acting in favor and in the interests of the United States society.
And yet these people who've been programmed and, as you say, in place and
Yes.
who are favorable to an opening with the Soviet concept, these are the very people who would be marked for extermination in this country?
Most of them, yes. Simply because the psychological shock when they will see in future what the beautiful society of equality and social justice means in practice, obviously they will revolt. They will be very unhappy, frustrated people. And the Marxist-Leninist regime does not tolerate these people. Obviously they will join the links of dissenters, dissidents.
Yes.
Unlike in present United States, there will be no place for dissent in future Marxist-Leninist America. Here you can get popular like Daniel Ellsberg and filthy rich like Jane Fonda for being dissident, for criticizing your Pentagon. In future, these people will be simply squashed like cockroaches. Nobody is going to pay them nothing for their beautiful, noble ideas of equality. This they don't understand, and it will be the greatest shock for them, of course. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. So basically America is stuck with demoralization, and unless, even if you start right now, here, this minute, you start educating new generation of Americans, it will still take you 15 to 20 years to turn the tide of ideological perception of reality back to normalcy and patriotism. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C. The time bomb is ticking. With every second, the disaster is coming closer and closer. Unlike myself, you will have nowhere to defect to.
Bezmenov's warning of the woke ideology was not heeded by the baby boomer generation. The Marxist-Leninist vocabulary of political correctness in relation to race, gender, culture, or sexual orientation washed through society from 1970 to the 1990s. Since the popularization of social media in 2004, political correctness, version 2.0, woke ideology, has firmly entrenched itself into society. Social media algorithms have been optimized to maximize screen time by promoting topical and divisive subject matter. A byproduct of this has been social isolation, depression, anxiety, procrastination, sleep disruption, sedentary lifestyle, addiction, low self-esteem, self-image issues, and kids vulnerable to cyberbullying and peer pressure. Under the influence of government ideology and vocal minority groups, social media been used as a tool to censor, cancel, shape social thought, and unite extremist activists. Kids' membership to woke ideology is automatic upon setting up a social media account. The playbooks of communist and fascist indoctrination is enforced by peer pressure, leading to conformity and virtue signaling. Any resistance is targeted by their peers in the form of public shaming, equivalent to the Chinese struggle sessions, and Soviet criticism and self-criticism. Kids have been taught to be racially and sexually conscious. Parental influence has been bypassed by a screen. By attacking the very foundation of society, democracy and family, the woke are drafting kids as foot soldiers in their ideological war. Wokeness conformity is altering the language, and all thought and speech is filtered to conform with this ideology. A lack of adherence leads to cancellation and censorship. The impact of this is leading to a teenage mental health crisis. Barry Weiss has summarized this as, persuasion is replaced with public shaming. Forgiveness is replaced with punishment. Mercy is replaced with vengeance. Pluralism with conformity, debate with deplatforming, facts with feelings, ideas with identity.